the SEC leaves its meetings in Destin, I feel like in a maybe a little bit different place than it started. The Big 12 had their meetings in Orlando, and they came out and said the thing that may not be the most convenient for them, but actually is probably the thing they need to say. And I wonder if it's kind of setting up a clash between the SEC and the Big 10. So let's go back to last week. So you had the Big 12 and the ACC have said they wanted this 5+11, 5 automatic bids, so 5 conference champs, 5 highest ranked conference champs, 11 at-larges in a 16-team field. Very similar to what happens now with the 12 team, except you just expand it to 4 more at-larges. But the Big 12, it's interesting because if you look at how this works, their other option is probably say, hey, we'll take what the Big 10 wants, and that's 4 auto bids for the Big 10, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12, 1 to the highest ranked of the other conferences, and then 3 at-larges. The Big 12 is probably going to get 2 in less if you do the 5+11 thing. But I liked what Utah AD Mark Harlan said to our friend Chris Vanini from The Athletic the other day. And he said, basically, we got to earn it on the field. He's like, we don't want to sign this saying we're going to be inferior to these other leagues. We want a chance to have as many teams as they have. Whether we get it or not is up to us. I appreciated that.
You know how I feel about that. It's the entire spirit of competition. It's the reason they play games. It's the reason why competition exists.
It actually makes me happy to hear people saying this because I felt like we were getting more and more complicated. Everything was getting so far away from common sense. And we talked about it last week with the Lane Kiffin thing. Why not just best 16? And like, I understand wanting to have the conference champions in there, the 5 highest ranked conference champions. That makes sense because they're going to be in the best 16 almost every time anyway. So this essentially would be best 16. So that brings us to the SEC, which coming in, you could tell from Greg Sankey and the way he was positioning his rhetoric that he either wanted auto bids or he wanted some different selection criteria. And the auto bid thing made sense because that's what the Big 10 wants. The SEC and the Big 10 are kind of in cahoots. Sankey has wanted to go to 9 conference games in the SEC. The only way they're going to 9 conference games, according to a lot of the ADs, is if they have the auto bids, so it can't hurt them. But they come out of that meeting saying, you know what? Our coaches did not like the auto bids. Our coaches don't want to go to 9 conference games. So this 5-11 thing may actually be something worth talking about. And that'll get really interesting because the Big 10 does not want the 5-11.
You know, I was very interested in the information that coaches didn't want the extra conference game. Because if you get the extra conference game with the protection, then what's the problem? Like, I'd love to know the thought process behind.
Well, they're just wear and tear. They don't want. Well, I know I can tell you why coaches don't want it. Get you fired easier. It's another loss when you can schedule a win.
Okay, now I get you. But if you have the protection,
that's where a coach's mind goes.
The 4 best teams in your league are automatically in. Then you have that extra security blanket for that extra game that might, it's like, it's harder, but then it's easier. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of,
and that's why they'll go to 9 if it's an automatic bid situation because it can't hurt them. It takes the power out of the committee's hands.
I find it funny, and I think that the SEC will agree to this, that by and large, in most years, if we actually, in fact, do go to 16, the SEC will probably get 5 teams in every year. So by doing the auto bids, you're actually shortchanging yourself unless you believe you're going to get the other automatic. You're going to get the.
Well, there's 3 at-larges there, so they think they're going to get one of those.
Get one of the at-larges, so maybe it's a wash. Yeah. But I feel like it's like getting volcano insurance when you live in Ohio. It's not a. It's like, I know it's nice to have, but like you're probably not going to need it. How many years are we going to go?
I agree with you there.
Field?
Here's where this is really interesting to me because this is one of those leagues actually seeming to back away from the thing that might make it more money. Because I do think for the SEC's finances, the better move is probably push the auto bids, which does give you the 9th conference game, which gives you more money from ESPN, which does potentially create a Big Ten SEC scheduling alliance in the non-conference that allows you to sell games for more later. Like, all of those things, I think, make the SEC more money. But they're not necessarily letting that guide them here. So I find that somewhat refreshing that they're at least listening to the coaches, or at least pretending to listen to the coaches a little bit, because it sounded to me when we talked to Sankey on Tuesday that he kind of just patted the coaches on the head like, hey, this is cute, but we got this deal here we're working on. But it sounds like the coaches got to the ADs and the presidents and said, hey, why not this? Why not just try to get as many in as possible? Because I think that's their attitude, is they can get a bunch in. Now, what they're saying now is they want to change the criteria for selection, which I'm not exactly sure how that works, because
this is when Daddy gets fired up, by the way. This is where I get fired up. You know,
all right,
like that.
I'm glad.
Okay.
Because I agree with you, and I had somebody come back at me the other day on Twitter saying, love you guys, but you're so wrong. The committee's so bad. They're always so wrong. And I said, okay, what other decisions would you have made in the top 16 in the last 10 years? Like, what did they get egregiously wrong in the top 16 in the last 10 years? Nobody can answer that.
Let me guess. No response.
I have to check. I don't want to shortchange the person. They might have responded.
It's an echoing of a talking point that doesn't exist. They heard the talking point, like, they're mad about it, and they don't know why they're mad.
You could go back to the BCS, which is humans plus computers, and take the top 16 from that, and it would be very similar. It would be almost identical to what the committee would do. So
yeah, because I saw the pamphlets and stuff in the forums that they were circulating about the strength of schedule and stuff like that. We're talking about that now, right? Because the thing that
go ahead.
The thing is that I want to know, and I'm going to go find it because, I got fired up on Twitter last week about this. But here's the thing from Russ Dellinger of Yahoo that got me going. Okay. Greg Sankey is laying the groundwork for a serious change to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee's criteria, describing his conference as not like any other and its schedule that stands alone. I do think there is need for a change. How do you explain some of the decisions made? And I think that is the echoing of generalities that don't exist.
What decision they left Alabama out? If you go to 16, they'd be in.
No, I know, but is that the specific decision that we're discussing? Are we still discussing Bama from last year? I can't do it anymore. I'm going to pass out. I can't have that discussion again.
Well, they are, because it's their business, Ari. Like, their business is getting the most people in. So they're going to discuss it until it's different.
I think what happens, though, is that a commissioner who has the SEC's money at stake and at heart here has to say everything that he can to champion a cause that will benefit him and his business, correct?
Correct.
And it doesn't matter whether or not that statement is factually accurate, and he can say it all he wants, but on our show, I think that there's probably a large portion of SEC people who listen to it, and we appreciate that, but they hear the talking points that are false, and they spit it back at you, and it's not a real discussion. It happens in politics all the time.
Well, here's what they want. I'll tell you
X, Y, and Z, and they're not even real.
I'll tell you what they'd like, what the SEC would like. They would like predictive power rankings to determine who makes the playoff. They would like S&P Plus, or probably something similar to your guy Tyler Shoemaker's index, because those will always favor the Alabamas and the Georgias.
Because those power rankings take into account recruiting rankings. And the number one thing that people can't stand about the sport, and even me in our context of the sport, is they don't want to hear about recruiting rankings. I know there's a disconnect there because you kind of have to talk about them. You do. You can't ignore them, guys. It doesn't matter how far into NIL we get. But the thing that I don't like is we can use recruiting rankings as a metric to decide, especially in the preseason and through the season, how we rank teams. But ultimately, even a recruiting nerd like me wants to see the games played. You know, you can't play the games with the recruiting rankings. You can help rank, you can help understand context, but you still want to see the games. I don't want to ever get to a point where recruiting rankings supersede the results on the field. The results of the regular season is all the context and information we need. So by the time we get to December, the results are what stand on business, not the recruiting rankings are great now. They're great in August. They're worthless in December when you have context of 12 games or 13 games being played. So like this idea that we need to, and this is the thing that I alluded to at the beginning of the show. Can we go into that now for a minute?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the thing that you and I have discussed and said 1.9 million times on this show since we got back together in August is how the sport has evened out a little bit, how it's harder for Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State to have two deeps or players in their two deeps that don't play that could start or be All-Americans at other schools. It's a much harder proposition to field a super team, which is why we have discussed the death of the super team ad nauseum, right? So I take this to Twitter, this discussion, which I thought was just saying water is wet. And this is what bothered me is that my response to the Greg Sankey laying the groundwork for serious change to college football selection committee's criteria was, what specific decisions is he talking about? Enough with the generalities. What are the decisions specifically that the college football committee has gotten wrong over the course of the past 10 years and why? Nobody can say anything about that because there's no example. Here's my actual take, Andy. The College Football Playoff Committee has done a magnificent job outside of the impossible situation of the 2023 Florida State debacle. And I don't know if there's a single thing that I would change that they've done in the last 10 years. I also think that most non-biased people would arrive at the same conclusions with the data that was available to them at the time of those decisions. So, like, here's the thing that got people really fired up, and I want to get your take on this because you and I have not talked about this. This happened on Thursday night, and our show was in the can already. Do you think it is smart, as a person who lives in Gainesville and is very familiar with the SEC's dominance of the past 20 years, to change the criteria or how we go about selecting which teams get into the playoffs using data and results from a 20-year period where talent accumulation does not mirror how it goes now? Like, my entire point of this, and I want to write it, I kind of wrote it a little bit with the Brian Kelly column, but I'll write it again, of the SEC was dominant from 2000 to 2020. The SEC had super teams, unlike every other conference during that time period. They won how many of the 20 titles? 15? I don't know how many it is off the top of my head. It's 14 or 15 of the 20 titles came from the SEC between 2000 and 2020. Do you feel comfortable changing the selection metrics moving forward, relying on that data? Because all those pie charts and all those graphs that we got in those nifty SEC, our schedule is unlike anything else, relied on data that I find to be antiquated at the present time. And I don't know if the Big Ten winning the last two national championships is enough of a precedent to change your mind. But as the current reality of our sport is that the Big Ten had more top-heavy teams last year than the SEC did. Whether people want to acknowledge that or not is up to them, but it's true. Do you want to change how we view the SEC and how we select the teams that go into the playoff using data that's no longer relevant to me?
I don't think they need to change anything. I think they should have the same 13-person committee, just pick 16 teams, and I guarantee you they're the same ones they pick anyway. They're the same ones your computer would probably pick.
And this is just a quote from Dellinger.
Yeah.
Greg Sankey is laying the groundwork for a serious change to the College Football Selection Committee's criteria. What? And you alluded to it earlier, using power ratings and S&P Plus.
Yeah, I get that, which is what I've always said is and I don't think we can let Vegas do it. I've always said let Vegas do it. This is letting Vegas. I never thought the people in charge would actually believe that.
Besides what I'm saying, I'm pushing back on any criteria changes. The criteria is fine. The criteria is working out great.
It's just ridiculous. And here's the ultimate problem. And Scott Strickland, the Florida AD, said this the other day at the meetings in Destin when he was talking to a bunch of us reporters, and he put it better than I've heard anybody put it. His thing, he said, people want objectivity in the selection, and it's not possible in this sport. It's not possible. You don't have enough data. Like, the basketball selection committee and the baseball selection committee have 30 plus games of regular season play for all of these teams. They have double-digit non-conference games. So much data that can be reliably collected and turned into something. The NFL has rules that make it where it is really hard for one team to get that much more talented than another. And they have divisions and they have wild cards and they have ways that if you win this division, you are in the playoff. Like, you don't have to wait for committee to announce it. And everybody wants that. They want something that is like the NFL or the NBA, where if you finish with this record, then you are in. If you don't finish with this record, you are not in. But college football is not designed like that. The conferences are not equal. This is what also the SEC is trying to tell people. But because they're not equal, and because I personally would prefer they did not get to a point where they are in divisions like the NFL, and it's been cut down so much that we're only talking about the top 30 teams, in which case you might be able to make it fairly equal. I don't want that. I want it to be weird and complicated. And the only way to pick teams when it's weird and complicated is have some people pick them.
I mean,
or you can have a computer do it. But the thing is, if you have a computer do it, they're going to pick the same teams.
And the only way you could actually do it is by tearing down the conference alignments. You take the 130 whatever teams and you make 30 conferences and you split them up in a way that makes geographic sense, where Alabama is in the Sun Belt and Georgia, and you have 30 conferences and you play a 10-game schedule against those 30 conferences with X number of teams in them. You decide a champion with a round-robin schedule, and you just do it the NFL way. And then you have a 16-team or an 18-team playoff where the conference championship from the regular season goes and wins the championship during the regular season, then goes on to the playoffs. The problem is that we cannot do that because there's 12 teams in the SEC that believes that they can compete for a national championship in a given year. And as long as they're not playing each other, or you can only take one conference champion from a group of that's that deep, you can't do it. But if you took SEC away and you took Big Ten away and you put the group of five and you mixed them all in together, the group of five might become the new cellar dwellers, but everybody's in an even conference across the board. Then you could just make an NFL system and play it that way. But you'd have to give up all the television rights. You'd have to tear it down.
Everybody says they want that objectivity, but the second you do something that makes it more like the NFL, but we don't want the NFL. Okay. If you don't want the NFL, then you also don't want an objective way to determine who makes the playoff, because that's how you get that.
But could you get to a place in this theoretical spot, like if I were the czar of college football and I could change anything I wanted and money didn't matter, where you would have Alabama and Appalachian State in the same technical conference, and you would put everything together, and there'd be cellar dwellers and there'd be favorites, and those two teams play every year, and it'd be up to App State to try to do their best to do. But most years, much like the Steelers win the AFC North most years, or the Ravens, and the Browns are the bad team. There are good teams and bad teams, but everybody starts week one with the same schedules. Oklahoma and Texas are in different conferences, and there's like one major power at every one, and everybody has a chance to win it on the field. And you have 20 conferences, or however the math would break down. It's a bad math breakdown.
Much.
But that's
those major powers
you could
beat the crap out of people in the regular season.
You would have the same division winners every year, probably, where LSU would win the Cajun conference and however you want to name them. And then you would have a 20-team playoff at the end of the year with the teams that won their conferences. There'd be no objectivity. Everybody had the same fair shake, and you'd have a sterilized version of our sport. Is that what you want?
Nope.
Does anybody want that? That's part of the reason why I didn't want the playoff to expand.
But that's the thing. Everybody tells you they want something objective. It's not possible
in the current system
with the sport.
It's possible if you tore the whole sport down. Yeah.
Correct. The Super League would make it more possible, but we don't want the Super League. Maybe some people do. I guess there's some TV executives that want the Super League. I don't want the Super League.
Unless you could create a Super League where I don't want the Super League because I don't want the Oregon State fans to be half the country. I don't want Washington State fans to be half the country. And actually, Cole Kubelik had me on a radio show last week on his show, and they asked me about it. And it just kind of struck me as bizarre because I don't know. Let me ask you this, because we do talk about this quite a bit. But if you were to take, you know how I go on my diatribe about Arizona fans, and I'm like, what's the point sometimes of like showing up every day and bleeding, red and blue, and hoping you're knowing in the back of your heart or in your soul that you can't win the national title.
Bear down. Yeah.
If Arizona was relegated to a smaller league and you had a super league of 64 teams and you had the tier B league, whatever you would want to call it, the magnificent league, and the national champion or the playoff participants in the second tier league got promoted to the Super League, and the Super League's last place teams got relegated, delegated, whatever that is, relegated down, then they could still be a part of the same system. But like, would an Arizona fan celebrate a national championship of the beer team league the same way they would? Like, the thing to me is like, I feel like maybe I'm talking out of school here. But
the championship, which is the second division in England, it's the one below the Premier League. They get good crowds. I mean, they get thousands and thousands of people at their games.
But do you think an Arizona fan or a Boise fan or a fan of a team that, can be really, really good at times, but probably isn't good enough to win the national championship? I think Arizona and Boise belong in the same sentence. Boise is a much more accomplished football.
They did play each other in that Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is do you think that they would be happier in a system where they actually have a chance to win it all? Or do you think that they're happy with hoping that they might be good enough to play against the big boys one day? Like, what's more fun?
I think they like the hope. I think people want the hope.
They'd rather be a guppy that might eat enough fish and get big enough to one day. Because like the thing is, like, Boise, what's more gratifying to Boise? Like getting to the 16 team or the 12 team playoff and playing a competitive football game against Penn State, or beating somebody like Wyoming in a championship in a league that doesn't include the big dogs? Like, what do you think is more fun to them? I don't even know the answer to that because I'm not one of them. But what's more fulfilling as a fan?
Yeah, and we've asked that, and I have had Appalachian State fans answer me with beating Michigan was more fun than winning the FCS national title. So,
because everybody wants to be a part of the big thing. But I guess if you made a 60-team Super League and a 60-team B-tier league, and there was some interchangeability with relegation.
You got to move that L.
Relegation. I've got, I'm not. By the way, my wife's in Paris for a shopping trip this weekend. That's why I'm in Arizona right now. And she landed yesterday and had no idea that this parent PSG was playing for the Champions League final. And Paris is like on fire right now. I was like, hell of a weekend for you to choose, by but completely on fire. By the way, yes, my wife is on. If you heard that right, that's what happens in my life. Yeah, so soccer is interesting, and I think that the relegation system is interesting.
But I don't think anybody would do promotion and relegation in America. I don't think anybody would go for that. It would be very interesting, and as for us, it would be fantastic. Great for shows, great for watching. Not great if you're the person who has to do the budget for somebody who's at the bottom of the tier 1 or the top of the tier 2, trying to figure out where you're going to be in 5 years.